Hi guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. Today I wanted to sit down and do a video definitively ranking all of the books written by my new favorite chick lit / rom-com writer, Mhairi McFarlane. I read my first book of hers in January and I have since blown through the rest of her catalog, which in the US so far is 7 books. Her 8th book, Mad About You, was just published in the UK and is going to be published in the US later this summer. And I wanted to rank those books using a kind of pseudo bastardized version of those tier ranking charts. The reason I'm not doing a traditional tier ranker, which usually has categories on the y-axis, is because I wanted to be able to use both the X and Y axis. So what I've basically done is picked out certain categories that I consider to be essential elements of any Mhairi McFarlane book, and I want to go through and rank each of her 7 books in each of those categories. So being both graphic design and tech challenged, I have thrown something together on Canva and I'm going to try my best to screen record. Before I jump into it, I wanted to give you a quick overview of Mhairi McFarlane's books. So Mhairi McFarlane writes what I think the publishing industry would term women's fiction, and her books do indeed follow often messy but always endearing 30-something British women who are navigating as best they can life, relationships, family stuff, and then also love. Her books are often set in either London or various northern cities in the UK. Both her heroines and her heroes are often quite imperfect in a way that I really like. There is always a romance in each of her books, and it does always end happily. I don't think that's a spoiler because that's what a lot of her book covers kind of signal. However, the prominence of the romance in each of her books varies, so I don't think that you could rightly call any of her books a full-blown romance novel. I think that people colloquially might refer to her books as chick lit or rom-coms. I definitely think that Mhairi McFarlane's books are descendants of Bridget Jones. And to go through her books quickly, just to give you a sense of the premise and some of the kind of tropes and ideas she's playing within each one. Her first book was You Had Me at Hello, which was published in 2012, and this is a friends to lovers second chance romance that is complicated by the fact that one of the main characters is married. Her second book was Here's Looking at You, published in 2013. This is a bully romance, which is a term that I was not familiar with until reading this book. Basically, the hero of this book bullied and persecuted the heroine when they were in high school, and then they kind of cross paths again 16 years later and he doesn't recognize her. The heroine is a bit of an ugly duckling became a swan situation. Her next book was It's Not Me, It's You, published in 2014. This is truly her wackiest book. It has a kind of madcap subplot to it that involves like comic books and a bit of a like micro heist, if you will. Who's That Girl was published in 2015. This is the dating a celebrity trope, so it's a kind of gender swapped Notting Hill sort of, where the main guy is an actor who is supposed to be on a show like Game of Thrones, and then the heroine is ghostwriting his memoir. Don't You Forget About Me was published in 2019. This is another second chance romance. He doesn't recognize her situation. One thing that's really funny about Mhairi McFarlane's books is that she does play with a lot of the same story beats and ideas several times, to the point that a couple of her books are almost like rewrites of earlier ones. If I Never Met You was published in 2020, and this is a book with fake dating. And lastly, most recently, is Just Last Night, published in 2021, and this is a novel that is about grief and loss, and within that she's kind of looking at the unrequited love trope and also enemies to lovers. Let's get into these categories. First category, perhaps not surprisingly, is the heroines. I do think her heroines tend to blend together a little bit. They're often kind of different takes on a similar mold of woman, but I'm going to start with Anna from Here's Looking at You, who I think definitely has the best and most fulfilling job out of all of these women. She is a professor of Byzantine history, and she's also kind of insecure in the way that a lot of rom-com heroines are, and I feel like that can be grating, but the backstory of her having been bullied in school and kind of trying to overcome that while still holding on to some of it fairly understandably, I think makes her feel like a very well-rounded character, and also makes that kind of trope of she's beautiful but she doesn't even know it feel a little bit more believable and bearable. Next up, I am going to say Edie from Who's That Girl? Out of all of Mhairi McFarlane's heroines, she's probably the most confident and self-assured, and kind of starts the book as a sort of London city girl living her best 30-something life, but then ends up getting kissed by a groom at a wedding where she is not the bride and is ostracized for a time from her social and professional group in London, and so ends up going back to her hometown of Nottingham and has a bit of a reckoning with kind of where she's at in life and whether or not she's actually happy. Eve from Just Last Night is probably my next favorite. I do think she veers a little bit into the sort of cutesy twee vibe that's not always my favorite, and I feel like she's hung up with a lot of unrequited love in this book, which is kind of my catnip, but also sometimes makes me like the heroine less because I want to be like, snap out of it. But she also is really going through it in this book, and also delivers one of the best dressing downs of another character that I have read in chick lit / maybe all books. Then I am going to go with Lori from If I Never Met You. This wasn't my favorite Mhairi McFarlane book, for reasons that I will get into a little bit later, but I did really like the individual hero and heroine here. This is a Mhairi McFarlane heroine who is getting over the breakup of a really long-term relationship, which is a recurring theme in a lot of these books, and I feel like the way that she fleshed out Lori dealing with that was the most compelling out of those books. On that theme of getting over a long breakup is Delia from It's Not Me, It's You, which has a very similar plot to If I Never Met You. Delia, I feel like, is definitely the most twee, wacky character, but I feel like this book also looks a little bit at her creative life as a comic book artist, which I always forget is a part of this book. Next up, I'm going to put Rachel from You Had Me at Hello. I feel like I like Rachel as a character, but she makes a lot of poor decisions both in the present and past timelines in this book that really let me and herself down. So that's why she's this low on the list. And then regrettably at number 7, I'm gonna have to put Georgina from Don't You Forget About Me, because unfortunately I think she's the most forgettable heroine of this bunch. Next up, we have the heroes of these books, and as you can see, I put a little Richard Madden up next to this category because in several of these books I feel like Mhairi McFarlane is heavily suggesting / implying that you should be picturing Richard Madden in your head as these heroes, which, you know, is fine by me. First up, in terms of the number 1 Mhairi McFarlane hero, is the hero of Just Last Night, which I feel like some people might consider it a spoiler because it's not immediately clear when this book starts who the love interest is going to be. He is a character who has already been through therapy and communicates really well. And also I think he is a character who is not what he seems initially. And I like the way that Mhairi McFarlane unpacks that throughout the book. Next up, perhaps controversially, I gotta put James from Here's Looking at You, who is the bully of the bully romance, which is not great. Maybe I'm going to regret this ranking. He is a character I was not expecting to like, but I think the reason that I'm ranking James so high, despite him being probably one of the more morally complex, sort of gray characters, is because it is her only book where you get dual POV, and I feel like dual POV in contemporary rom-coms / romances is increasingly hard to come by, and I really wish that wasn't the case, because when it's done well, I really love getting that hero's perspective on stuff, and I think that there's such a kind of growth and redemption going on with this character in the book that it was really necessary to have his perspective for it. I do feel like I have a bit of recency bias for this book because I finished it literally at 1 a.m. last night, so James gets the number 2 spot. Okay, and then next up we have actual Richard Madden, i.e. Elliot from Who's That Girl? So he is a hotshot actor on a show that is very much supposed to be Game of Thrones, and I am 100% sure that he is not Kit Harington. And I feel like Elliot is just your kind of classically appealing romance hero vibe. And also Who's That Girl is one of the more romance focused of Mhairi McFarlane's books. Next up, at risk of just stacking all of these books on top of each other, I'm gonna put Jamie from If I Never Met You, because again, I feel like I had problems with the way that the relationship in this book was built up and developed, but I really liked Laurie and Jamie individually as characters. Jamie's someone who, again, has a bit of a bad reputation as a sort of office playboy, but as usual, there's more than meets the eye. There's hidden depths there. I feel like the rest of the heroes here are a little bit more forgettable. I liked Adam from It's Not Me, It's You, because I think that he and the heroine have a bit of a locking heads sort of orientation towards each other at the beginning of the book, because he's trying to take down her sketchy boss. And then I'm gonna do Ben from You Had Me at Hello, because I was really into this until the kind of end and the sort of disappointing resolution of him being married. I feel like Mhairi McFarlane does really well with all of that morally gray sort of real life stuff, but I think this, I believe, was her first book, and I think that it's probably her sort of weakest exploration of that kind of sort of sticky territory. And then lastly, again, my apologies to Georgina and Jamie from Don't You Forget About Me, but they are just forgettable, like much of this book. Now we're moving on to the premise. I am going to start with Just Last Night, because this is a book that looks primarily at grief and loss, and then manages to kind of weave the romance in the second half of the book really beautifully into those themes that it's already exploring. And then I am going to do Here's Looking at You, because I think that it similarly ties these themes and ideas that it's exploring with Anna's backstory of having been bullied really closely in with the romance. So it feels like all of the storylines are reinforcing each other, and that is also something that happens in Who's That Girl, which I'm going to put at number 3. I always love a like Notting Hill concept. I think these 3 books are definitely her strongest in terms of the premise and the themes and the structure all kind of reinforcing each other to just have a really strong story overall. Then beyond that, I think I'm gonna do You Had Me at Hello, because I like the friends to lovers story in this, and I like the kind of flashbacks between uni and the present day. And then, at risk of just stacking It's Not Me, It's You up in number 5 the whole way through, It's Not Me, It's You, definitely the most wackadoodle book. I don't even know like what the plot of this would be. There's so much bonkers stuff going on, but I do think that it has a bit of that like girl goes to the city to kind of reinvent her life a little bit. So I think that is fun, I guess. Then I'm gonna put If I Never Met You, because this is a fake dating situation, and I don't love the fake dating trope generally, and I also super don't love it in contemporaries with like smart 30-something adults who should know better. I feel like fake dating, I understand why it's so popular, because I feel like it's very easy to set up these very tropey, swoony moments, but by nature of just fake dating itself, it all feels very forced and manufactured to me. So even if I may be carried away by it in the moment, generally speaking, I feel like I lose respect for the characters while it's happening. And then lastly, I'm gonna put Don't You Forget About Me, because this is kind of like Here's Looking at You, where it's a situation where these 2 characters went to school together and then years later reunite, and the hero doesn't recognize the heroine. The difference is that in Here's Looking at You, Anna, the main character, has lost a significant amount of weight and looks very different. And so I feel like that is something that's explored throughout the book, and I think it's pretty legitimate and believable that James doesn't recognize her, especially because it's been like over 15 years. Don't You Forget About Me, it's been more like 10 to 12 years. And also crucially, the hero and heroine of this book dated and were like in love in high school. And so I just found that that really stretched believability. The next category is friends, because another hallmark of Mhairi McFarlane's books is that the heroine always has really wonderful friend groups. If you know the scene in Notting Hill where Hugh Grant takes Julia Roberts to his friend's place for dinner, and it's this group of just very funny, witty, warm British people, that is the vibe of the friend groups in these books, and they do sometimes bleed into each other a little bit, but I wanted to include this category to highlight some of the standouts. The first, I would say, is the friend group in Just Last Night, because friendship is a really big part of this book. There's a group of 4 friends in this book that is really, really wonderful, and a shout out to Justin in particular, who I feel like is one of the funniest friends that Mhairi McFarlane has written. Then I'm gonna do the friends from Who's That Girl, because when Edie goes back to stay with her family in Nottingham after being in London for many years, she reunites with some of her best friends from school, and so they have a very close trio and are kind of getting to know each other again as adults in a really wonderful, beautiful way. Then I'm going to put You Had Me at Hello, because I do think that this is a kind of 4-person friend group that is a little indistinguishable from some of the other friend groups in the book, except that there are 2 friends, Igor and Mindy here, who have their own kind of secondary situation sparring, and it develops in a fun way. Then I'm going to put If I Never Met You. So the heroine in this book has a friend who's basically identical to the best friend in It's Not Me, It's You, but Jamie in If I Never Met You has a really wonderful female best friend, Hattie, who ends up playing a crucial role in the book. So I'm gonna bump that one above It's Not Me, It's You. And then I think the friends in Here's Looking at You and Don't You Forget About Me are great, but also no one is particularly memorable, and James in Here's Looking at You has an absolute asshat of a best friend, and so I guess we'll put that at the bottom. Okay, next up I have Banter.
Just Banter!
I apologize to any English people watching. I simply could not help myself.
Just Banter in it.
These books have a real wit and charm to them that to me feels very specifically English or British. So again, maybe there's a recency bias here, but I really feel like Anna and James have a banter and a rapport that feels so lived in and so winning, and that also really helped me get over the kind of bully premise of this whole book. And then I'm gonna put Just Last Night, just because there are lines from the hero in this book that I can remember being quite funny and endearing, so I'm gonna put that there. Then I'm gonna do Lori and Jamie, I think. At this point I might be kind of splitting hairs. And then It's Not Me, It's You, just because there's a bit of a kind of butting heads in there that I think makes for good banter. I don't remember Elliot as being like a banter king or anything like that, so I'm gonna put that down there. You Had Me at Hello and Don't You Forget About Me. Next category is trauma plot, and I am using the Parul Sehgal definition of this from the New Yorker, as in using trauma as a kind of shorthand or shortcut to character development and also to kind of narrative, thematic, whatever depth to the story. And I do feel like this is something that is increasingly common in romance novels, particularly contemporary romance novels. I think that there's a lot of characters kind of unloading or revealing their trauma to each other, and that being a kind of shorthand for them bonding or growing closer in a way that troubles me a little bit and that I need to kind of further unpack in my own head. But Mhairi McFarlane does tackle heavy topics and serious themes in a lot of her books, and I think she does that with varying degrees of success. I think that she's always thoughtful about it, but I think that the way that she builds those topics and themes into the book narratively, she sometimes does that better in some books than in others. So the first one I'm going to do, once again, is Just Last Night, because this book deals with loss and a lot of heavy stuff, and I think that she does it really beautifully. I think that she really minds it and is really thoughtful about it and ends up having this really moving depiction of what it's like to suffer not only a loss, but a really shocking, kind of unexpected loss in your life. And then I'm gonna do Here's Looking at You. I don't always super love the ugly duckling narrative. I'm not super into stuff about like weight and diets and all of that stuff. And so I wasn't expecting to like the way that she handled it in this book. But I think that Anna kind of going from being someone who is actively persecuted because of how she looked to someone who is beautiful but doesn't even know it. I think that the way that she moves through the world feels really realistic based on her life experience. What I like about it here is that she has mostly worked through a lot of that trauma, and I think it also has a serious reckoning with the way in which the hero kind of played into that trauma too. So then I guess I'm going to do Who's That Girl, because Edie has some trauma that is kind of explored throughout the book, and I think done fairly thoughtfully, that has to do with her family. And then I'm gonna put It's Not Me, It's You and You Had Me at Hello, because if these books had any serious stuff in them, I'm not remembering it right now. I'm gonna put Don't You Forget About Me here because it deals with really serious topics. It touches on sexual assault, and I think that that's really important, but I do think it was a little bit like information being withheld, even though you could maybe guess at what was going on and then revealed later. And I feel like sometimes narratively there's good reasons to do that, but I just don't super love that, especially because I think narratively it was trying to kind of withhold information about why these two characters who were in love in high school never spoke to each other after like the prom, basically. And I feel like when you're following a character who knows their whole story and then that piece of information is withheld from you as the reader, I just don't love it. Similarly, I feel like If I Never Met You has egregious trauma plot after trauma plot popping up for both Laurie and Jamie, and I don't think that any of those storylines get proper exploration or care. I also don't like that those elements of the story seem to be there for Jamie and Laurie to bond over, and it seems like those things are there for them to grow closer as opposed to kind of coming up with more organic, personality-based reasons for them to like be drawn to each other and fall in love. So I don't like it in the trauma plot sense of it being like a shortcut to intimacy. The second to last category I have here is speech/declaration. So I feel like this kind of fits in with the rom-com trope of someone making a grand gesture at the end of the book. Number one, I'm actually gonna have to put Jamie's declaration in If I Never Met You, because without too many spoilers, it is something that he says to someone else that then gets relayed to the heroine in a way that I think is really romantic and also a kind of cute subversion of the grand gesture where it's not a gesture at all. So there's an email in that book that is incredibly swoon worthy. Then I'm gonna put Eve's dressing down speech from Just Last Night, which is not part of a romantic declaration, but it's just a really, really wonderful speech and so satisfying, and I feel like plays with and subverts some kind of expected rom-com beats and tropes. And also I think it's juxtaposed with a really kind of low-key, naturalistic, sweet declaration from the actual hero of the book later on. Then I'm going to have to do Here's Looking at You, in which the hero at one point kind of makes fun of the heroine for reading Mills and Boon romances, which I realize is a knock against him, but I think he eventually comes around and kind of takes seriously that she likes the idea of a grand gesture, and I think makes a very sweet speech in line with that. Who's That Girl has another kind of low-key declaration, and it comes from the heroine, so I really liked that. It's Not Me, It's You, like I have been saying, is the same exact book as If I Never Met You, so this one also has a letter declaration in it, which was sweet. I just liked the way it kind of played out in If I Never Met You more. And then You Had Me at Hello, I feel like doesn't have a super memorable declaration to me. And then Once again, I'm gonna have to put Don't You Forget About Me last, not because the declaration in this book wasn't memorable, but because it happened in public, and that to me is unacceptable and horrifying. And then for the last category, I have cover, because I think looking at Mhairi McFarlane's books here is super fascinating, and I feel like you can see the ways in which, at least in America, they've seemingly had trouble knowing how to market her over the years, but also I think it's a reflection of the ways in which there have been huge changes in how chick lit and romances have been marketed generally in the last few years, with the kind of, you can see here with her later books, this abundance of kind of cartoon rom-com covers. First up, I'm gonna do If I Never Met You. I do feel like this book looks like a lot of other covers, but I like it. I like the color scheme, and I don't hate a cartoon cover. Next up, I think I'm gonna put Don't You Forget About Me, because I like the way this cover looks. I don't love dogs on book covers, but it's okay. Next up, controversially, I'm gonna put Who's That Girl? I feel like you can't even buy this edition of this North American copy of this book anymore, but it's the copy that I got out from the library, and it is super like mid-aughts girl power that I feel like should be offensive to me. I just like how aggressively mid-aughts girly this cover and the title is. Then I'm gonna do Just Last Night, because I do feel like the one problem with these cartoon covers is that I think it signals that these books are romances when in fact they're not romances. They're more women's fiction, chick lit, if you will. And so I think that the covers are a little misleading, especially in the case of Just Last Night. It really doesn't give you a sense of how much grief and sadness are a part of this book. Like, why did they make the cover yellow? Why not make it blue? But I think that's also a broader issue with cartoon covers and the ways in which it's becoming like increasingly difficult to parse what you're actually going to get with a cartoon cover if you aren't already familiar with that author's writing. It's really interesting because with You Had Me at Hello and Here's Looking at You, you can totally see that these books were like published in the wake of the Jojo Moyes craze, where it's like these covers are the epitome of go on girl, give us nothing. Like, I don't even know how to put one over the other. I guess I'm gonna do Here's Looking at You because the colors are slightly better, and then I'll do You Had Me at Hello, and then I'm gonna do It's Not Me, It's You. So yeah, there you have it, my definitive ranking of Mhairi McFarlane's books. I guess if it wasn't clear already from the time spent doing this convoluted ranking system, I love Mhairi McFarlane's books. I really recommend them. Her writing has a real wit and warmth to it that just makes me want to live inside of her books. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you've read any Mhairi McFarlane, let me know and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks so much. Bye.